Prison life, perception versus reality. It's about time we tell the people exactly what corrections is like. And my boy Gary York, who's been on the show before, Gary York, the author of Corruption Behind Bars and Inside the Inner Circle, that's what he did when he conducted his survey. He asked the right questions and got some very unique responses. Now, my name is Anthony Gangi. I'm the host of Tear Talk. Guys, get on that YouTube channel, guys. Subscribe, engage, help me build my venue. I want to thank Prison Documentaries for helping me increase my venue, putting me on their page. They have over 177,000 subscribers, so thank you for that. And also Manhattan Neighborhood Network, which is available on Vios through the 5 boroughs. You can get it through Manhattan, Queens, Staten Island, Brooklyn, and Bronx. But if you're not in the 5 boroughs locally, you can stream it live. Our venue is growing, guys. We're starting to get our voices out there. And guys, a lot of people got their start from public access television. But that's enough about me. Again, my name is Anthony Gangi, host of Tear Talk. But now I want to bring it over to my guest, who's been on multiple times before, Gary York, again, author, and a guy that wrote a real banging article that I did not realize was his until I called him up and said, check out this article. And he's like, yep, that's mine. And it's a great article about a survey that he did that was a needed survey. So, Gary, I want to thank you again for coming on the show.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Hey, Gary, this survey is amazing. It really is. It covers a lot. It talks about everything from solitary confinement to drug smuggling, contraband, prison violence. And I know me and you always have communication. We always discuss about the importance of people knowing what we do, and just, they're always in the, we're in the shadows. They don't really understand what we do. So we've always made it an effort to bring it out to the public. But in the process, we also inform our own. And I believe the article that you did kind of balances that out. You inform the public, but you also woke me up to things that I'm like, I've been in corrections for 15 years and I found some of these answers unique. So in your opinion, or what was your motivation for doing this article, this survey?
Well, with the recent events over the last couple of years with work-related injuries, officers being injured, correctional officer deaths, violence with inmates, and corrections in general, I wanted to get the public's perception, and I tried to find the best way I could by using a method to get a diverse group of people. So I used Twitter and LinkedIn, and I have a very diverse following made up of a lot of different people. Many of them are former inmates. Many of them are professors, attorneys, correctional staff, police, and probation and parole. So I did a survey on LinkedIn and Twitter and tried to get the public's perception on what they see in regards to prison issues.
Now, remember, the article can be found on Corrections 1, and there's one thing I want to quote here. It says right in the article, all those not written in stone, all those working in corrections should have a constitutional right to safety, with correctional management and legislature responsible to ensure the safest work environment possible. And that kind of feeds off one of our last shows we did about, we had the incident in Delaware where the lieutenant was killed during a riot, and the response from the attorneys of management was like, well, guess what? Correctional officers or frontline staff, they don't have to guarantee their safety. Management doesn't have to guarantee their safety. It's not a right. And of course, me and Gary jumped all on that. And I like the fact that you plugged that in your article, because guess what, management? You are responsible for the safety of your employees. And that statement is disgusting. It's a desperate statement that you made because you knew you got caught, because you could have done something to prevent that riot and prevent that hero from falling. All right, so real quick, Gary, first off, the questions are good. I was a little surprised about some of the responses, but how did you format the how did you format the survey, and how did you how were they able to get the answers that they chose?
Well, I wanted to make it as fair as possible, so I gave, with each question, 3 possible answers, and if they did not like the 3 choices that were given, I gave an other category where they could leave a remark. And that way, if they don't like my 3 choices I left, they could put their own, in their own words, their own answer.
Okay, so the first question that you ask is, what are you most concerned about in regard to prison violence and corruption? Okay, so again, what are you most concerned about in regard to prison violence and corruption? Now, he gave answers that they can choose from, and also the other category was other, and then from other, he labeled what those others were. So in this case here, for the first question again, what are you most concerned about in regard to prison violence and corruption? First answer was inmate violence, 17.14%. Corrupt officers, this is the big one, 47.14% worry about corrupt officers. Dangers of contraband smuggling, 15.71%, and other is 20%. Now, out of the others, these were the categories of concerns: inadequate staffing levels, corruption of senior administration, inferior inmate programs, and counselors who are supposed to help inmates being involved in contraband smuggling. Now, I'm going to tell you something, Gary. If you ask me that question, now, obviously, everything mentioned here, inmate violence, corrupt officers, danger of contraband smuggling, and the other categories, they're all relevant, all very important. But right now, what's on the top of my mind, and again, I'm not minimizing the other categories. Trust me, they're all just as equal in value. But what comes to my mind first, if you were to ask me, is going to be in the other category. It's going to be the inadequate staff levels. Because in my mind, I mean, you have a lot of issues right now with inadequate staffing on a national level. And my concern is when you don't have the proper amount of staffing, you can't do the preventive measures that can keep us a safe and secure facility. And then you're also cutting down on manpower for response teams, posts that aren't being covered. I mean, it just leaves a gamut open of just negative outcomes. So I believe my concern right off the bat would be inadequate staffing level, because in my opinion it could lead to the other categories that you mentioned, like inmate violence, corrupt officers, dangers of contraband smuggling. These are things that you can't prevent if you don't have the proper manpower. But were you shocked when 47.14%, now remember guys, the people that answer these surveys was attorneys, both state attorneys and public defenders, probation, parole, correctional officers, former inmates, college professors. So we do have a kind of balanced level of thinking here, balanced level of responses. Were you shocked to get from both sides corrupt officers at 47.14%?
Yes, I was. That's a huge percentage of people who think the worst thing we need to worry about is corrupt officers. And based on my experience of investigating prison crimes for 12 years, is I find only a small number of correctional officers to be corrupt. But what happens is that small group of officers' actions hurt all the officers' reputations. Now, the sample survey indicates 47.14% of our respondents are concerned about corrupt officers. So how do we change the perception? Well, we have to work harder to prevent corruption from within, and we have to get all officers to report any signs of staff misconduct. But we're going to have to work harder from within to get this public perception changed.
I want to add something, Guy. I think the reason why that's also a big response is because that's all they see in the news. They don't see the balance of the good. They just see the negative action of like one officer, and then it kind of gets generalized as that defines the system. So I believe that another part of the education would be, as you mentioned, is to draw the balance. And if you see one act that's bad, go in with like 20 or 30 or 100 acts that are good. Because remember, they're talking about interactions. I myself alone have hundreds of interactions a day. So when you have that one or two negative interactions, that's one officer compared to the many who are having positive interactions. So I think with this one, to also add to that perception, or to make, obviously give them the reality of it all, I honestly think it would also be, like you said, create that balance needed and let them see the truth. Like you said, it's a very low amount of officers that are corrupt. So I think that if we could create a balance, then maybe they could start seeing the truth. Because in my mind, it's scary that 47.14% went right to corrupt officers, as opposed to like inmate violence, dangers of contraband smuggling, and the other one is at inadequate staff levels. Because in my opinion, inmate violence, dangers of contraband smuggling, and inadequate staff levels deals directly with the safety of the officer. Now, I'm not saying corruption of an officer also that affects safety of the officer, but in my mind, if I was the public, the first thing I would say, again, but I'm biased because of what I do, I would say I'm concerned. Like if you ask my wife, let's do this. If you ask my wife, the first thing my wife would say is, I'm concerned about inmate violence or attacks on my husband. As opposed to corrupt officers. Right. I just don't think that my wife would jump up and say that. But again, she's biased to the system. But that's very informative, Gary, because what you came up with is 47.14% obviously came up with corrupt officers. So how do we address that? And we address that by balancing them with the truth. That's not the case, like you mentioned.
Well, bad news is good for the media, and very seldom do they tell the good stories about correction officers. So, the media is feeding the source and they are to blame for quite a bit of that response, I believe.
Right, and when you mention that, that's why I'm not actually, now that I'm educating myself, I'm not too shocked by that response of 47.14%, because that's what's exposed in the media. So I'm not super shocked about that because of your population that you pulled from. I would expect it to come from like, maybe the professors. Again, we don't know. I'm not asking for anything in detail, but I would expect that to come from one side. But I would expect like the correctional officers would more lean towards the immediate problems that they're facing every day, which would be the dangers of contraband, inmate violence, and inadequate staff levels. But definitely to me, the priority at this point, even though I'm not to minimize or negate the other ones, is inadequate staff levels. That, if you ask me what's my biggest concern right now, I would highlight inadequate staff levels. But I also want to talk about something else too. Inmate programs, definitely, because you're looking at to get the inmate in the proper mindset. So if you have inferior programs, you're not preparing them from the outside world, the transition gets to be weak. So now you may have inmates who are going to fall back to that impulsive way of thinking. So it's very important that you have good programs, but you also have to make sure the inmates are receptive to those programs. You can get at them aggressively, but you can't force people to change, and their change has to be pure. They have to be motivated to change based on internal incentives, not because I'm getting out for parole, this is what they want to see. Because at the end of the day, I want to fill seats up with people who want to take the program, not people who are taking it because they have to go out for parole and they need it for their record. And corruption of senior administration is also very important, guys, because if you're in upper level management, you set the tone. And if you pretty much set the tone that you can do corrupt things and it's more like do as I say, not as I do, then the people that are below you are going to start doing the same things. They're going to start being corrupt. And what can you do about it? You can't do nothing. It just becomes a domino effect. It starts from top down. So excellent. Okay, so Gary, move on to question 2, which this was unique for me. Okay, so right now, if you watch the news, there's always this thing about getting rid of solitary confinement. It's it messes with people's heads, and people are looking at solitary confinement, if that's what you want to call it. But again, some of us call it restrictive housing, some call it administrative segregation. They're looking at it in the primitive way, the old ways. When you locked up inmates, you forgot about them, you gave them no programming, you did nothing to make them better. It's not that way no more. I'm going to tell you the truth, guys. They get hit aggressively with more programming. They get out of their cells more than you could ever imagine. And it's actually meant to put them in a secured area so we can focus on them, but also keep our mind focused on the population and worry about the many, because we also have other ones that have to be rehabilitated, right? And I want to mention something. I saw something with Cory Booker. He was talking about females getting arrested more and winding in the system, and he starts talking about things that need to change. I want to comment on something real quick. He mentioned about pregnant inmates not going in solitary confinement, stuff that, we normally do. And I hate it when politicians, and this is just, us talking here, I hate it when politicians try to make it look like they're inventing the wheel and say things that they want to do, making it look like we don't do those things. So when they come up, yeah, they initiate these things. No, you didn't. It's not a practice that we, again, we don't put pregnant inmates in solitary confinement. Obviously, there's another life we have to worry about. We make sure that we do what we can to protect both lives. But for people that want to change policy or want to invent something new, and obviously if it works, sign your name to it. But don't piggyback on a policy that's already in play and make it look like that's what you're doing, that you're implementing something new, because all that does, it makes it look like we are doing something totally foolish and you're the hero. And that's not the case. So for people that listen to those politicians, you should ask them, is that a common practice that you're trying to put in play, or is that something totally new? And most of the time the politician will come and say, well, guess what? It's something that they do, yes. I just want to enforce it. Oh, try that for someone else. Because at the end of the day, when you say that you're trying to implement something new, it makes it look like we're not doing these things. And that's unfair. And the public starts to believe in the primitive notion of who we are. And that's not the case. So shame on you, Mr. Booker. Very upset about that. Because we don't put pregnant females in solitary confinement. So when you're adding to that, maybe you should go check the prison world and see how it really works before you comment about what we do. Very upset with that. Now go run for your votes, do what you got to do, but let the public know the truth. Because that was very upsetting to me. Okay, so you asked, should solitary confinement be used to remove violent inmates from the inmate population? Now, again, you create a very balanced population. So I would expect, when I saw this is what shocked me. I would expect a lesser number of people who would say yes to solitary confinement because of the times that we're in. I would expect the correctional officers, people involved in law enforcement, parole and probation, of course I would expect them, because they know the system, to agree. You know, yeah, we need it because there's no other alternative. But having said that, with professors involved, attorneys involved, both state attorneys and public defenders, we got a good 88.73% that said yes. No is a 1.41%. The ones that are onshore is 4.23%, and the other was 5.63%. But let me say something. For the people that say no, the reason why I think it's so low is because there's no other alternative to deal with a hostile inmate, because you have to protect the population and keep the facility running as normal. If the inmate poses to be a threat, you have to do something with that inmate so you can keep the rest of the facility running. But again, the inmates that are being removed from GP are not being forgotten. As for the 5.63% that fell into the other category, it's a great survey, Gary, here. Very interested in this. Solitary confinement is cruel and unusual punishment. Of course, that's what they say, but again, they don't know. Remember, that's a primitive look. Solitary confinement, the inmates get more movement than they ever did. They get hit with programs more aggressively now than they ever did. You know, it's amazing how these people are saying this, far removed from a correctional facility, by the way. Confinement should be redesigned for 24-hour verbal communication, but no physical contact. Plus, by the way, that's people that just don't read it, because a lot of that stuff is being implemented. Redesign confinement for mental health issues. It doesn't have to get redesigned, because guess what? It already is being done.
It already is.
It already is being done. Used sparingly and with oversight. Of course it's used sparingly. It's a last resort. And of course it's being looked at. It's being looked at by administration on down. And always calculate severity and totality of the circumstances before using confinement. And I would like to think that staff does that beforehand. I like to think that anytime they put it in there,
should be done, and that should be done, and hopefully it is being done. And I guess what I like to see with some of these answers is people are really thinking about this. They just don't realize that it's happening. They're told it's not happening, and these other categories in solitary confinement, every one you just read, should be happening, and I hope it's happening, and I know it's happening in most places.
Right, but again, these are people that don't know, that are going to want to try to initiate changes. This is what I just talked about with Booker.
Right, like a politician who doesn't know anything about corrections, just say he or she came up with this idea, and it already has been implemented.
But that's the key, and the public feeds into that like this person's being a pioneer, setting a new trail, and that's not the case. Now, the next question was, what punishment should a correctional officer receive for physical abuse of an inmate? So I'll repeat it again. It's a good question, very balanced. What punishment should a correctional officer receive for physical abuse of an inmate? So 25.35% says prison sentence. 15.49% says jail sentence. Now remember, guys, you're not familiar with jail and prison. Jail is anything less than a year. Prison's more than a year. Probation, 11.27%. Other, 47.89%. Now I'm going to relate to this other category, because other says punishment should be according to the severity and contributing circumstances of each case. Is 100% agree with that. The context of the situation. Consideration should be given to acts of self-defense and the type of situation. No punishment needed. So if the person is in self-defense, obviously the person has a right to live. The person has a right for self-preservation. So if the inmate's coming at them and, you know, their only weapon at the time is a radio, and they clonk the inmate in the head with the radio, the officer was in the right to do that, because the inmate's coming at them, and that officer has a right to live, has a right to want to go home. At that point, if that's the only thing he has to save their life, or she has to save her life, she has a right to save her life. Loss of job, certification and pension, and mental health intervention. So I do agree with a couple of these things. Now, I agree with all these answers, actually, because it all depends on context. But I do believe if you have someone that is not balanced and they start developing, or you don't know for a fact, but it looks like there's a pattern being here, then you definitely have to have that person mentally evaluated. I mean, if it's stuff that you can't prove, but you have a feeling that something's going on, but just the circumstances are just kind of either way, you can't prove it either way, I still believe that you should have some type of mental health intervention. If obviously if the person is violent, I mean, my incident, one act of being aggressive with no justifiable cause would automatically require removal, possible, depending on the severity, prison sentence, jail sentence, but definitely the loss of job, certification, and pension, because we're better than that. and we need to be better than that. Would you agree, Gary?
I agree, and whoever made the comment in the other category, punishment should be according to the severity and contributing circumstances of each case. Really, that's what it all should be. Everything should be considered that way.
Right, and I agree. I feel that that's the case. You always have to look at things in context and not always jump the gun thinking that, oh, an officer beat up another inmate, the officer's automatically wrong. No, guys. And in some cases, unfortunately, but I'll be objective here, goes the other way too. An inmate beats up an officer and it doesn't always look like it may be the inmate's fault. So again, we have to be objective, look at things within context, and judge things fairly. And as Gary mentioned before in the survey before, 47% of people are concerned about corrupt officers, and that creates a big bias where an officer gets involved in beating of an inmate, automatically the officer is considered to be wrong. I believe the same thing happens on the streets, and that's not the case. We need to remove that bias and start looking at things objectively and be fair when passing judgment. Because at the end of the day,
exactly.
At the end of the day, if the officer's right, what's going to wind up happening here is the public, they're not going to see that because it's going to be too late, and they're going to think the system is corrupt, and we're not solving anything that way. So we need to be fair, firm, and objective. All right, so this is a good question. When an inmate kills an officer, what punishment should the inmate receive? This is a very important question because this is what deters behavior. In order to protect the officers or frontline staff behind that wall, there has to be a zero tolerance policy for any attack on staff. That's what protects us. There need to be laws in play that protect us because that's how we're able to do our job. We expect, of course, a good amount of staffing, a good response team, but I also expect that if I get attacked, I expect the prosecutor to pick up on that immediately. Protect me. Because you protect me, you protect others. Sometimes you have to make that example. You want to attack an officer? Wrong move. Because now the law is going to handle you, and the law is going to do it correctly. So again, when an inmate kills an officer, what punishment should the inmate receive? You got the death sentence, 71.83%. I'm in 100% agreement with that, guys. I'm going to tell you that right now. Again, you look at the context, be objective, but if an inmate kills an officer and they're found guilty, they don't get life. They get the death penalty. And that's the reason why I'm mentioning that is because hopefully that's enough to deter other inmates from trying to get lucky and attacking an officer or attacking frontline staff. Life in prison, 14.08%. Onshore, 2.82%. And other is 11.2%. So, again, the other kind of falls into just the context of the situation. It needs to be decided by the court in each case. We agree. Depends on circumstances, of course. And a death penalty should always apply to any senseless murder. Again, people may argue that because of mental health, but again, that's kind of an issue that's very tough. That's a whole nother show, Gary, when they talk about mental health.
Well, that death penalty should always apply to any senseless murder answer. There's a lot of things that could be in there, and like you said, the mental health issue is one of the big ones, and that would be that's a whole other topic on its own.
It is, like, to be on the more objective side, to be on you're going to have the conservative side who's going to be aggressive with it, not caring about the inmate's mental health and well-being, and some aspect of me obviously agrees with that. But then you also, on the other side, there are inmates that are going to push the mental health card, and they could have a history of mental health issues. But again, if the inmate killed the officer, and the inmate really does have mental health issues, in my thing is the inmate's dangerous. So I'm not looking at any potential that this person's ever going to be a benefit to society. And if I want to come out with an aggressive stance, my opinion would be he killed an officer. I just, it's a tough answer, but if he killed an officer, mental health or not, I think there has to be an example made. You have to protect that frontline staff. Now, a lot of people may not agree with me because of the mental health aspect, but again, I'm looking for the potential of, will this person ever be a benefit? The person took out an officer's life. And the problem here is this too, real quick, is a lot of people, if an inmate gets let off because he claims they have a mental health issue, there are going to be a lot of the other inmates that may try to pull that excuse and be successful, and we'll start a trend of that. And next thing you know, the inmates that don't have mental health issues are using excuses, and now we have officers that are going to be vulnerable again because every time they get attacked, an inmate has a get-out-of-jail-free card. correct?
That's correct. And, the state attorneys and the judge and the jury will have to decide all those type things in a court of law, unless the inmate, of course, pleads guilty. But there's a lot of circumstances, but you're right. A lot of inmates have told me during investigations that they can have the prison psychologist thinking any which way they want them to think. Now, I don't know if that's true, but I'm pretty sure there's a lot of inmates who can convince a psychologist that they're crazy.
Right, and as I said, if someone really is, and you got, and there really is that proper mental health evaluation, well, obviously we'll look at it within context. There's a context, I agree with that, but having said that, this could also become an excuse that the inmates can use over and over again that's going to give them that get-out-of-jail-free card that unfortunately is going to get more officers or frontline staff killed. So be careful of the get-out-of-jail-free cards that we provide to inmates who are going to utilize that for evil purposes or nefarious reasons, because at the end of the day, that's going to put us in jeopardy easily. Now,
I would expect the state attorney to do everything in their power to try to prosecute the inmate and shoot for the death penalty. I can tell you that.
Right. And if unsure, obviously you still have the life in prison. So if you do have someone that really does suffer from a mental health issue and a jury doesn't feel that they can put that person in, to death because of that issue, well, you still have the life option. But again, you got to do something that deters. You got to do something that prevents, and you got to protect that front line because they're vulnerable. Okay, so number 5 was, should drug smuggling in prison be addressed by legislator? Okay, so again, a lot of times when inmates get caught with drugs, it doesn't always get pushed to the prosecutor, or if it does, they kind of say, well, you know what, that behavior is kind of expected in a prison. We got other shit to worry about on the streets. So again, that's a problem, because that's not deterring the behavior. That's not putting any consequence or negative consequence on the actions that these inmates are doing. So, again, should drug smuggling in prison be addressed by legislator? I agree with the majority on this. 61.97% say yes. Then there's the 19.72% that say no. 5.63% say unsure. 12.68 say others. And for the other categories, there are enough laws on the books for this already. Well, they obviously don't know how the system works. Enforce the laws already on the books. First-time prison staff offenders should receive a prison sentence. And I'll be honest with you guys. Contraband's a major problem in correctional facilities, especially with this new K2, these new synthesized marijuana. It's killing inmates. People are overdosing. That's a problem. It's going so far as contact visits being shut down because there's a threat. You got in New Hampshire, they had inmates overdosing like crazy. A couple of fatalities. So they had to commit to an action of getting rid of contact visits until they can find out what that issue is. But at the end of the day, when the public starts to cry about these inmates not getting contact visits, it's not the reaction that's the problem. It's not what the facility did to stop that and prevent death. It's what the inmates are doing that brings in the drugs, that takes advantage of the privileges that they're given. But sometimes they think these privileges are rights. And when the public pushes on it, the public pushes as if these privileges are rights, and they're not. They're privileges. So inmates, when they feel that they can't lose these things, well, guess what's going to happen? They're going to break the rules, because at the end of the day, they're going to know they're going to get visits back. You can't take visits away from me, so guess what? Sure, I'll take a chance and bring drugs in, because at the end of the day, you can't get rid of that from me. I need my visits. The ACLU, whoever's going to push for my visits. So there's nothing to deter me from stop bringing in drugs in a facility. So I like the fact that there should be laws in play that are just as hard on the streets. If you get arrested for, selling drugs on the streets, well, if you're caught selling drugs in the prison, it should be the same type of sentence. I agree. 61.97%. I agree with that percentage. What about you, Gary?
I agree, and I also believe that laws that are already on the books are not being enforced enough in the prison. Yeah. Many times the state attorney will say, you just handle it administratively. I would turn in an investigative report where an inmate was involved with marijuana or another type of drug being smuggled into prison, and they said, well, we're just not going to prosecute that. You guys handle it administratively. And see, that's where we're wrong. We have to punish them just like as if they were on the street, because no punishment, they're just going to laugh in your face, turn right around, and make another plan to smuggle more drugs in.
Right, and again, it needs to be addressed because we're trying to prevent contraband from coming into the facility. We have that synthetic marijuana, K2 fentanyl, Fentanyl is a big problem right now. So we have to do something that stops that. And I really believe when it comes to this case, we're expecting more from the legislators. We're expecting more laws put in play that literally compare drug selling or drug use or whatever the case may be just as serious in the prison. Just as serious in the prison as they do on the streets. They have to, because at the end of the day, we need to prevent. And if there's no consequence for these inmates, you're not going to deter. It's going to keep on coming. It's going to make our job harder. Okay, so the next one was, this is weird because, so should the use of solitary confinement be addressed by legislature? Okay, so you got 33.80% say yes, 45% say no, 14 is unsure, 7% other, and when you say others, it says politicians know nothing about prison and mental illness and the use of confinement needs to be addressed. Okay, well, first off, let me just say, for the person who put mental illness and the use of confinement needs to be addressed, it's being addressed. Don't let the politicians fool you and think that they're pioneers with what's happening in the evolution of where we're at with restrictive housing, ag-seg, or solitary confinement. They're trying to make it look like that they're doing new things, and that's not the case. These have been practices that have been put in play for a while. It's just, unfortunately, it's starting to get more attention now. But having said that, they're not the pioneers. They're not initiating anything new. It's already been in play. So, Gary, your thoughts on this was, should the legislators address solitary confinement? Yes, but they need to be informed. They need to be informed of why it works and that there is no other alternative and how it works. Correct?
Right. And, solitary confinement, the only way a politician can address that is to understand the system and how it works. And unfortunately, whoever the person was that put politicians know nothing about prison, I'm going to have to pretty much agree with that and upset a lot of politicians because they don't understand the system and they don't understand how to implement new ways of doing things because they're not there. They're not there watching. They don't know how it works. And
they also don't do their research. Research a little. Make sure that before you think you're implementing something new, make sure before you, as I said, you think you're implementing something new, make sure it's not being done. Okay, make sure it's not being done. Don't piggyback on another option and don't piggyback on what we're doing and then say that you're the pioneer for it. Don't take credit for the hard work that this front line is doing because these are policies that they're already committed to, and now you're going to put your name on it and you become a hero, and that's unfair because it's the front line that made those recommendations, and you're taking their hard work and effort. You're taking their evolution and you're stealing it as it's your own. I like the last question. I was a little shocked about this. In general, do you care about what happens in a prison? I expected a lot less, but 87% say yes, 4% say no, 4% unsure, 4% say other. And for the other, you didn't have any responses for that, but that's okay. So 87%.
I think on a question like that, people that put other just don't know what they do or don't. I think they were so far in between, they had no clue which way they wanted to go.
Yeah, but I did like the fact that 87% do care, which was a shock to me because I always say that we work in the shadows and people don't care. So I'm hoping that, and by the way, they did this anonymously, so they don't have to do a socially acceptable answer. So maybe that is a wake-up call for us. Maybe that says that there are more people that care than we thought. So, hey, Gary, again, excellent survey. Well done. It can be found on Corrections 1. Very informative. It addresses the percentage and what we can do to fix that. But we were also able to comment a little bit and give our perspective and hopefully educate those who are looking to be educated on how the system works. So, Gary, would you like to say anything in closing?
I would just like to say that if the politicians want to help, they need to help. But they need to help with money, staffing, safety, equipment. We just had a lot of military equipment released back to our police officers on the street for their safety. Don't forget about corrections. Help us out with some safety equipment as well. And there's a lot more we could talk on, but politicians can help. They just need to help in certain areas in certain ways and work with us, not against us.
And the show ran over 28 minutes, but we had to do it. It was just very informative. We had to cover the questions and we had to get our comments out, but that's what we do. So again, Gary, thank you for coming on. Thank you for such an excellent article.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate it. Take care, Anthony.
Take care, man. All right, guys, as again, the show is Tier Talk. My name is Anthony Gangi. Very informative, great survey. Find it on Corrections One, read it. Hey, comment, share. You know, I have it on my page. Comment, share. Guys, don't forget, like that YouTube channel. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Engage, interact. Let's make a venue. Because I'm going to tell you something, guys. At the end of the day, if we have a venue that's big enough and we have the numbers, people will start thinking twice about challenging our perspective and creating lies about who we are and what we do. It's about time we educate the public. And it's about time we create a venue for that. Again, the show is Tier Talk. My name is Anthony Gangi. As always, guys, pleasure. Stay safe.